Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we are looking to find the best of fun books out there that everyone should read. And I am reviewing today the book called The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. And the title is kind of deceptive. I thought it was going to be a mystery, and it really isn't. It's a historical fiction with a little bit of mysteries kind of sprinkled in the book, but it's very much a historical fiction. So this book is set in Botswana, an African nation. I'm going to say probably in the 1980s. It's definitely after the independence of the country, which was in 1966, but it is definitely not super modern. This book was written in the 1990s, so it couldn't have been, taking place after that. It's pretty historically grounded. Feels very authentic. Okay, so the plot of the story is that a young lady wants to open the first detective agency in the country, especially a first detective agency run by a woman, which is where the title of the story comes in. And so the plot of the story is a lot of her history getting up to the point of getting the detective agency, and then a little bit beyond that of some of the cases that come up, some of the problems, just life in general. So it's more a story of her life, even though she's a fictional character, than it is about the mysteries that she has to solve. So things that I like about it are the historical details. It is really impressively interesting, I think, about all the historical details that go along with living in Botswana during that time period. I didn't have any idea about the culture and the economy and what's typical. For example, it comes up as part of one of her cases, but it seems that a large percentage of people in the area drive stolen vehicles, and it's kind of like a subtle hint that cars stolen in America are shipped to Africa and sold to these people. It's just kind of that's interesting. It's also got some interesting cultural aspects, like, for example, and this is some humor, but somebody asks the main character's father, as he's lying on his deathbed, what do you think heaven will be like? And he was kind of like, I don't know, but I hope it will be an endless sea of white cattle with sweet breath. And that's kind of a funny way of looking at heaven. It tells you what they value. The people there highly value cattle. It's basically their form of wealth. And that's very interesting culturally, because you're like, who knew? It does a little bit on, the social aspects of what's going on, and, how people relate to each other. And our main character is Native African, and there are some white people there, and, how do they view these people, and how do they view their neighboring countries like South Africa, and how do they view just all sorts of things, snakes or something. So that I really liked. Lots of details, and it felt very immersively authentic. There's an author's note that says he lived in Botswana for quite a while, and you can tell. There's definitely somebody has been there and lived there and telling you authentic details. I really like that. And as I said, the humor, there's not a lot of humor. This is definitely not a comedy, but there were little sprinkles here and there that are amusing. So I did like that. The mysteries. So there's probably 4 or 5 mysteries in this book. Most of them last a single chapter. 10 pages at most. But I liked the mysteries. Almost all of them, you felt that the main character was clever, but not a superhero type of clever. Not the kind of person that you're like, she's out there and doing things that nobody in the real world would ever do or figure out or whatever. No, it actually felt pretty clever. as well as authentic. And I liked that. So that was a good job on the author's part of coming up with good ideas for their mysteries and how she solves them with the limited tools she has available. Okay, so the things I dislike about this. There is a part in this book that I will call anti-romance. Yes, there's nothing romantic in this book about how the main character, so she did get married. So you see her meet the man, get married to the man, and what happened afterwards. And it was pretty nasty. I mean, she ended up in the hospital. He kind of, he beat her up. How do I put it? The explicit part is not very explicit, but it sounds pretty unpleasant. Let's put it that way. And like the kind of thing that, she probably should have called the police rather than marrying him. Yeah. And then she gets pregnant. He, beats her up, and she ends up eventually, not because of the beating up, but eventually she ends up losing the baby at the baby was born premature and died after a month or 2 months or something like that, which is not pleasant to read about. It was, again, kind of felt authentic, but that's not fun to read about, right? And if those kind of things disturb you, you really shouldn't read this book. And there is one other aspect that I would consider needs a good warning. One of the things that come up in this book is a child vanishes. And the parents come to our detective and say, find our missing son. He's 8. And she goes, I don't know if I can. And everybody around is like, yeah, that happens. And we know exactly what happened. And it comes out that is very typical that if children go missing, it's likely the local witch doctor took them because somebody rich wanted a potion that involves, we'll just say, killing a child to do it. And that's pretty awful, okay? I mean, that actually, it was very disturbing to me. This made me, feel awful, sick to my stomach. I was thinking about it for way too long. I really did not like that at all. So that's something that deserves a warning. Both these things that happen in this book that you're just this may feel real to the culture, but yuck. So I'm going to read you a excerpt from the book. This is kind of a little bit longer than normal. Usually I only read a couple paragraphs or a half a page. I'm actually going to read about more like a page and a half, so it's slightly longer. But I picked this selection to give you an idea of the tone that the author is using, how much detail that they give, showing you, these are irrelevant details for the most part, but setting the stage, give you some interest in what's going on with our main character and how she's setting up her new detective agency. So this is going to be from page 62 to 64, and this is about her getting the building and setting up, before she has any clients, the situation, okay? So our main character's name is Madame Ramotswe. Maybe Ramotswe? Ramotswe? I'll try and pronounce it Ramotswe. Okay. The building she bought had originally been a general dealer shop, but it converted into a dry cleaner's and finally a bottle store. For a year or so it had lain empty and had been lived in by squatters. They made fires inside, and in each of the rooms there was a part of the wall where the plaster had been charred and burned. The owner had eventually returned from Francistown and had driven off the squatters and placed the dejected-looking building on the market. There had been 1 or 2 prospective purchasers, but they had been repelled by its condition, and the price had dropped. When Madame Ramotswe had offered cash, the seller had leapt at her offer, and she had received the deed within days. There was lots to do. A builder was called in to replace the damaged plaster and repair the tin roof, and again, with an offer of cash, this was accomplished within a week. Then Madame Ramotswe set to the task of painting, and she soon completed the outside in ochre and the inside in white. She brought fresh yellow curtains for the windows, and in an unusual moment of extravagance, splashed out on brand new office set of 2 desks and 2 chairs. Her friend, Mr. Maitscowie, proprietor of the Road Speedy Motors, brought her an old typewriter, which was surplus to his own requirements and which worked quite well. And with that the office was ready to open, once she had a secretary. This was the easiest part of all. A telephone call to the Botswana College of Secretarial and Office Skills brought an immediate response. They had just the woman. Madame Matusi was the widow of a teacher and had just passed their general typing and secretarial examinations with an average grade of 97%. She would be ideal, they were certain of it. Madame Rem Otsui liked her immediately. She was a thin woman with a rather long face and braided hair in which she rubbed copious quantities of henna. She wore oval glasses with wide plastic frames that she had fixed, and she had a fixed but apparently quite sincere smile. They opened the office on Monday. Madame Ran Otsui sat at her desk, and Madame Make Utsi sat at hers, behind the typewriter. She looked at Madame Rem Utsui and smiled even more broadly. "I am ready for work," she said. "I am ready to start." Said Madame Rem Utsui. "It's early days yet. We've only just opened. We will have to wait for a client to come." In her heart of hearts, she knew there'd be no clients. The whole idea was a ghastly mistake. Nobody wanted a private detective, and certainly no one would want her. Who was she, after all? She was just Precious Ramutsui from Mochundi. She had never been to London, or wherever detectives went to find out how to be private detectives. She'd never even been to Johannesburg. What if somebody came in and said, "You know Johannesburg, of course"? She would have to lie, or just say nothing. Madame Mactusi looked at her and looked down at the keyboard. She opened a drawer, peered inside, then closed it. At that moment, a hen came into the room from the yard outside and pecked at something on the floor. "Get out!" shouted Madame Matuski. "No chickens in here." At 10 o'clock, Madame Matuski got up from her desk and went into the back room to make the tea. She'd been asked to make bush tea, which was Madame Ramutski's favorite, and she brought back 2 cups. She had a tin of condensed milk in her handbag, and she took this out and poured a small amount in each cup. They drank their tea, watching a small boy at the edge of the road throwing stones at a skeletal dog. At 11 o'clock, they had another cup of tea. And at 12 o'clock, Madame Ramutsui rose to her feet and announced she was going to walk down to the shops, buy herself some perfume. Okay, so that was the end. Like I said, that was a long section, but that kind of gives you the idea of the atmosphere, the tone, the way the writer writes, and as you can see, it's just telling you about life. It's not, relevant to like a mystery or anything. And that the whole book is pretty much like that. So with that in mind, my overall impression is I'm going to put this in the okay category. If I was doing a list on important books, I actually would probably include this, because this is a really unique insight into semi-modern African culture. I think that's fascinating. But it's not really always fun. Not just the parts that I gave you warnings about. There was definitely that was very disturbing, I didn't like. But it's the kind of book that I feel like would be assigned to a high schooler in literature class and say, "Here, you must read this," and you kind of, okay, and you make through it. And some people really like this kind of book, but it didn't strike me hugely as fun. Like this is part of a very long series, I think, 16 books or something. And I really don't have a strong desire to read any of them. But I didn't dislike the book. I didn't come away going, "Oh, that was awful." There was nothing wrong with it. The writing was strong. The imagery was fantastic. The main character I liked. I didn't dislike this book. But it just doesn't strike me as strongly a fun book that I felt like, wow, I was just so enthralled and entranced and I really want to read more. It just didn't make that cut for me. So I'm going to put it on my okay list. Not bad, not phenomenal, just okay. All right, on to part 2. So my next part is going to be, what am I doing next? So I don't have a physical copy of this, but it's going to be a book called By Mort, The Grand Opening. So the first book in a series that's called, they bill it as a apocalypse, something like that. So it's apparently something to do with aliens and the end of the world, and it all has to do with a massive company like an Amazon type of thing. An alien Amazon invades, and it all has to do with computers or aliens or something. Anyway, it's a sci-fi. And so I'm going to try it. I need to figure out what the author's name is so I can tell you, because By Mort. It's 2 authors actually. It was, my computer's being slow. Damian Hansen and Joseph Phelps are the authors. And it looks like it'll be fun. So we'll try that next. And I hope you enjoyed this review and will join me for the next one. Thank you.